Welcome to the webinar about the Online Safety Act specifically for the games industry. We hosted this webinar about a week ago, but unfortunately the first couple of minutes didn't record. So this is my makeshift opening. My name is Andrew Wailes and I am the CEO of PlaySafe ID. And we hosted this webinar to try to help educate the gaming industry as to the upcoming Online Safety Act enforcement by Ofcom, the independent regulator in the UK. And yeah, it was myself, PlaySafe ID. We are a reusable digital identity provider. We enable gamers to verify themselves once with us. And then every single game that integrates us, we're able to certify the age band of that user to make sure that you are compliant with the Online Safety Act under highly effective age assurance. In addition to that, anyone that's caught cheating, botting, or being inappropriate to children faces penalties. So we're able to keep cheaters out of games and prevent them just creating new accounts and coming straight back in. And additionally, and more importantly, in regards to child safety, we're able to, anyone that's a predator or been caught being inappropriate to children, grooming children, CC, CSAM, etc., we're able to permaban those users and prevent them ever coming back in and accessing children again. I was joined on this webinar by the wonderful folks over at Modulate, and they give us their 2 cents regarding chat moderation and the codes of recommended practice regarding moderation that you need to adhere to under the Online Safety Act, as well as Entrust, who are a phenomenal KYC provider. They actually partnered with PlaySafe ID in order to provide the verification process, and they speak to highly effective age assurance. And we were also joined by Anybrain, who do some amazing stuff in terms of behavioral analytics, both to prevent cheating and bad behavior in games, improve player account security, player satisfaction, as well as to assist in the age verification of users. So yes, the following is the actual recording of the webinar, where we will deep dive into all of the topics, everything that you need to know to ensure that you are compliant with the Online Safety Act and to ensure that by design you're ensuring that children are as safe as possible. So without further ado, let's proceed. So illegal content and content that is harmful to children, they're actually 2 different categories, and we're going to dive into what those are, what the difference is, and what companies have to do. And then there's the requirements that companies have to perform as well. And this includes a range of assessments that need to be performed, as well as codes of recommended practice that need to be implemented. And they range from everything from having a child protection officer as a named individual that's responsible for child safety, through to moderation procedures, through to highly effective age assurance, and a bunch of other stuff. It sounds like a lot. It's a substantial amount, but we're going to break it down chunk by chunk to try to make it more digestible for everyone. So with that, why are games in scope, and are games in scope? Absolutely. So it's been made very, very clear by Ofcom, as I mentioned, the independent regulator appointed by the government, that games are absolutely in scope. The way that it's defined is services who have users in the UK or links to the UK need to be safe by design and have a higher standard of protection for children than adults, whilst providing transparency and accountability in relation to those services. Games are user-to-user internet services, as they are internet services, a service that is made available by means of the internet, by means of which content that is generated directly on the service by a user may be encountered by another user of the service. So we'll go into this in more detail, but broadly what this is saying is if you have a user that can basically create or perform any kind of content, including direct messages, group messages, voice chat, etc., that's constituted as user-generated content that can be discovered by another user. And if you have links to the United Kingdom, which is defined as the United Kingdom is either part of your commercial strategy, so you're either you're running ads to users in the UK, or you're running live ops campaigns to users in the UK, or just broadly speaking, the UK is part of your commercial strategy. Or if you have children within the United Kingdom that access your product or service, or if your product or service is one that's likely to be appealing towards children. And these are all ors, they're not ands. It's important to make that distinction. So the commercial strategy might have the UK in it, which would put you in scope. You might have children that access your game or service, which would put you in scope. Or you might have a game or service that would be appealing to children, in which case that would put you in scope. It's also worth mentioning that under 18s is the definition of children. So, we're not specifically talking about little kids. We're talking about a whole range of children here. It's also worth mentioning as well, there's a couple of bits that Ofcom say in addition. So UKI and a couple of other organizations challenge the Online Safety Act, broadly saying things like games are a more protected or more enclosed ecosystem than like social media, for example. So why is it that we're under the same kind of regulation? And there was a bunch of feedback like this. And Ofcom basically turned around and said tough. Where they've done a huge amount of research. They've got a huge amount of evidence that shows that there are so many millions of children that play and access games that it is obviously an area of risk to children, and services need to, by design, ensure that they're protecting these kids. There's too many kids that play games for them to be like, oh, it doesn't actually matter. The volume of users is there, therefore the level of protection needs to be there. Additional comments that were made were services cannot decline to take steps to protect children because it is too expensive or inconvenient. Protecting children is a priority. All services, even the smallest, will have to take action. There's also a couple of bits within the codes of recommended practice that we'll get to in a bit, which highlight there are certain additional protections that if you have over 700,000 monthly active users, you need to put in place. But it's a really clear distinction and direction that Ofcom really want everybody to be compliant in here. It doesn't matter if you're a couple of guys in a garage working as a labor of love or a passion project, or whether you're a major publisher with a long withstanding IP. They want you to do the assessments, and we're going to cover all of this, but they want you to do the assessments. They want you to put in the codes of practice to protect users, and they want to see that you've evidenced all of this as well, that you've really taken the care to making sure that children are protected. I'm going to pause for a second. Anything that you guys want to chuck in at this stage, or shall I carry on waffling on?
Good on my end.
I will continue waffling on. I am so good at waffling on. I will do my best. So we've covered that games are in scope. The important things to know as well is what key dates have happened and what the big key date is that's coming up. So there were children's access assessments. This was basically determining if you have under 18s accessing your product or service. These were due in January this year. This date has long passed. So this is something that's an expectation to have already been in place. The second assessment is the illegal content assessment, as well as abiding by illegal content safety duties. Now, we're going to go into illegal content and harmful content shortly, but this was supposed to be done as of March. Then there's the children's risk assessment. The children's risk assessment was due by April, and this is basically understanding the various ages of your users and the various risk factors within your platform, and deciding who's most at risk and what measures you need to put in place to ensure that children are safe. And then the big date that's coming up is July 24th. So in about a month from now, this is the key date that Ofcom is going to start enforcing their regulation of children's safety duties. This is basically, you have to have all of the evidence in place. You have to have all of the codes of practice enabled and integrated. You basically have to be delivering this safe experience from this date. And this is the date that they're really going to start both helping more companies that are struggling or need advice or guidance, but also those that are clearly negligent, that have had a problem, that have had reports and haven't done any of the measures that they've put in place, start issuing really big fines, even with the potential to prosecute legally. A really big point that I haven't mentioned, this is kind of like my last point, and then I'll move on, is this doesn't affect companies in the UK. This affects companies globally, regardless of where you are, regardless of where your legal status is, that has links to the United Kingdom, which, as we covered, means the United Kingdom is either part of your commercial strategy, that you have children within the United Kingdom playing your game or service, or that your game or service is likely to appeal to children. And on that note, because I know a lot of people will go, oh, we'll just say we don't have children playing our game. Ofcom specifically say you can't do that. I'm sorry. That's a very easy loophole that they just closed off straight away. If you don't have highly effective age assurance in place and you haven't done a children's access assessment, they will automatically assume that you are in scope and you do have children accessing your service. The only way for you to be able to show that you don't, and you don't need to make any changes, is by having highly effective age assurance in place. It's about being able to prove that you don't have children actually accessing your service, and as a result, there's no risk to them. So yeah, global standard, very important. Key deadline coming up. Already a couple of deadlines that have come and gone, but it's really time to get stuff in place to make sure that you're compliant. The next big one, I'll just throw on the screen share again because it likes turning off, which is a hoot. I really like this feature. Do I need to care about complying? Like, is this something that you guys should really care about? Absolutely. First of all, penalties start at £18 million or 10% of global turnover, whichever's greater. So it's a very, very, very big disincentive that they've put in place to have people do nothing. Like they really, the penalty is very severe. They want you to be compliant. They're taking child safety seriously. The second point is child protection is now law. Like this, again, isn't just a policy. It isn't just like a nice to have. This is literally the law. It has to be abided by. And again, this is a global impact. It's not just the UK. So regardless of wherever you are, wherever your company's legal status is, or if you've got subsidiaries or however your corp structure is, it doesn't matter. As long as you have users within the United Kingdom or children are likely to access or children do access or the UK as part of your commercial strategy, you fall within scope. You are a regulated user-to-user service. So you do need to comply. And yeah, we've kind of covered this, so I'll jump on. The other big point as well is this is just the beginning. Like the UK has set a precedent here. There's the Digital Services Act, which is the European equivalent. The big difference between the Digital Services Act and the Online Safety Act is the European Digital Services Act doesn't include user-to-user internet services. It just focuses on search services and social media companies. The Online Safety Act does search services, social media companies, anyone with a content recommender system, and user-to-user internet services, which is why games are pulled into scope of this, but not the DSA, not the Digital Services Act. But that said, there is scope for the DSA to expand to include user-to-user internet services, and I'm starting to hear rumbles of that, which means you would have to have these kinds of processes for the UK Online Safety Act in place for all European users as well. And then if we look at the precedent that's set by like GDPR, COPPA, CCPA, and stuff like that, it's usually about a 2 to 5 year lag between legislation happening in the UK and Europe to then going across to the US as well. So this is just the beginning. And I think that as over the next 2 to 5 years, I wouldn't be surprised if the Digital Services Act absolutely included user-to-user internet services based on what's happening with the rollout now of Ofcom for the Online Safety Act. And I wouldn't at all be surprised if the US rolled out some kind of similar, not exactly the same potentially, but some kind of similar protection to children legislation, which will most likely include highly effective age assurance, actually verifying that a user is the age that they say they are. So this is a big change. Like this is, and I think that's something that we all need to be conscious of. Like this isn't a minor change. I watched a 7-hour webinar by Ofcom last week, and they put their hands up themselves and they were like, this is a fundamental shift in terms of the way that the internet is interacted with. And that's an enormous statement, right? Like, oh, we're going to change the way that people interact with the internet and the way that services need to operate with users. It's enormous. But it is here and it is being enforced, and it's well-intentioned. It's not, I don't think that it's coming from a place of Orwellian or evil legislation or anything. We'll cover this as we go into the content types, illegal content and harmful content to children, but making sure that children can't be told to kill themselves, or they can't discover suicide content, or they can't discover eating disorder content. I don't think they're bad things. And I think that we do have a duty as service providers to do our best to make sure that children are protected from pornography, suicide content, self-harm content, et cetera, et cetera. Like this is serious stuff. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but it's definitely a thing that's happening, and we all don't have a choice about this. So we just need to make sure that we play by the rules and do the best job, which ultimately is protecting children, which is a pretty good reason to be making these changes. So I'll turn my screen share back on. I love this. This is great. Let's jump into the types of content, though. As I mentioned, the Online Safety Act goes to regulate 2 types of content. There's illegal content and harmful content. And again, I'm sure that you guys watching this are going, oh, I'm sure that this doesn't apply to me. I have a video game. I don't have suicide content, self-harm content, etc. Let's go into the detail, and you might be surprised actually how in scope you are and some of the measures that you have to take to protect users. So key illegal content includes offenses to children. So that includes child sexual exploitation and abuse, known as CC for short, as well as child sexual abuse material, so CSAM, and it also includes grooming. So basically people being, pardon my French, but nasty bastards towards kids, right? And unfortunately, this is quite prevalent, some services more so than others, but it is a key part of illegal content that is within scope and needs to be covered as part of a risk assessment, as well as children protected from. There's also threats, including hate, and abuse and insults, including hate on the illegal side. Now, I'm trying to cover a metric ton of ground as quickly as I can here, because this is an enormous topic. And as I say, I watched 7 hours of or 6 hours of Ofcom doing a whole thing on this, right? And that was still quite light. There is loads of resources on Ofcom's site that literally details absolutely every single one of these criteria, what constitutes it as illegal and what constitutes it as harmful, loads of stuff. We've got a guide on our website that I'll link to at the back of this. It includes all of this information, as well as links to the specific documents that Ofcom have produced, either their statements or their guidance. So if you guys want to either do this yourself, or if you want to pass it to your legal teams for them to dive into, everything's referenced. So this isn't me paraphrasing. This is literally what it all says, and you can check it all out. But that's the illegal content side, and you guys can dive into more detail. Where it gets more interesting, I think anyway, and where it gets more contextual, is harmful content. So there's 3 categories of harmful content. There's primary priority content. This is the most serious stuff. This is pornography, suicide, instruction, suicide content, by definition, which encourages, promotes, or provides instructions for suicide. There's self-injury content, which encourages, promotes, or provides instructions on how to perform a deliberate act of self-injury, and eating disorder content. Now, to my point earlier, you guys are probably like, oh, I have a video game. This is bullshit. This doesn't apply to me. I asked a question during the Ofcom webinar, and I've got a clip on it on my LinkedIn, which is really cool. But my question was basically, if a user was to say to another user, go kill yourself, KYS, something like that, does that constitute suicide content? And if a user was to say, go hurt yourself, go cause physical harm to yourself, and any kind of like synonymous term for that, does that constitute self-harm content? And their response was absolutely. If it's a user saying it to another user, it meets the definition of a user-generated content being discovered by another user, and the definition under suicide instruction matches and self-harm matches. So this might seem like, oh, this is silly legislation and these are silly things that are coming in place. But actually, when we get into toxic communities and toxic communication, this is very, viewed by the legislation, it is risky stuff. And I'm sure that any of us that have young children, how innocent they are and how much they love playing games and how great the online world is. For them to be receiving messages to kill themselves or harm themselves, it's quite clear that this is a serious topic, which is why this is primary priority content, and taking serious measures to now safeguard kids is really important. The second type of content is priority content. This is still important and viewed as harmful, but it's less harmful than primary priority. I apologize as well. I wish they named it something different than primary priority content and priority content, because it gets a bit muddled, but they're the 2 categories. So priority content includes content which is abusive or incites hatred, based on characteristics, race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, disability, or gender reassignment. Content which incites hatred against people of a particular race, religion, sex, or sexual orientation, or who have a disability, or who have the characteristics of gender reassignment. There's also violent content. Again, this is all in the guide and it's all on Ofcom's stuff, so you guys can drill down into it. But violent content, so content which encourages, promotes, or provides instructions for an act of serious violence, and bullying content. So yeah, the primary priority content is, pornography, suicide, self-injury, eating disorder. It's the most serious stuff. Priority content is kind of like broadly people being dickheads. That's maybe not the most professional way to say it, but that's kind of how I view it in my head, is it's people being toxic and just being a bit of a dickhead. And the third category is non-designated, which Ofcom have done a great job with this one. They've said it's basically a catch-all for everything that we haven't mentioned. So it's anything else you can kind of think of. As you go through and do your access assessments and risk assessments, and then put in codes of practice to abide by child safety duties, you will have to reference the various risk factors. So the different ages of children, like the different age bands of children, the various functionalities that could be direct messaging, private whispers, group chat, VoIP, etc. And the types of content that they might be at risk of. This is kind of like the structure to doing those assessments. And leads on nicely to risk factors in gaming. So I've touched on age bands. Ofcom have suggested these 5 age bands. Now, these aren't set in stone. I believe that there's leeway for you to come up with your own age bands, but this is what they recommend. So I would recommend using these as a template. 0 to 5, pre-literate, very young kids. 6 to 9, primary school ages. 10 to 12, transition. So kids start to be interested more in like social media and the online world. 13 to 15, where kids start to get more independence, they take higher risks, they get greater exposure to bullying and harmful content generally. And 16 to 17, which is they start to get more legal rights, less parental supervision, less parental concern, but that can also expose them to potentially more risks as well. So these are the age bands that you need to be conscious of as you're doing your assessments and then putting in the codes of practice. And then there's functionalities. To be honest with you, within gaming, there's pretty much one core functionality, which is the most has been identified by Ofcom, but is the most risky, and that's basically user-to-user communication. It's in-game chat, it's voice chat, it's user messaging, either direct or group chat. It basically boils down to toxic players, people being abusive, people saying horrific things. It's also worth mentioning that harmful content isn't illegal content, right? So it's not that they need to go to prison for this. It's that you need to make sure that, the 12-year-olds or 14-year-olds playing your games or whatever age can't be told to kill themselves or hurt themselves or whatever, right? It's important. It is important, which is why there's now this legislative framework in place to ensure that service providers and products are safe for those age groups. As I click onto the next slide, it shuts again. Huzzah. I'm glad I'm only doing this the once today, because if I had to do this like on that every hour on repeat, like a product demo, I'd lose my mind. Content categories. So we've covered this in kind of like the hierarchy of illegal content and harmful content to children. But you've got the age bands, you've got the functionalities, and then you have the content type. So again, this comes down to toxic players. It comes down to abuse. It comes down to keeping children safe. So yeah, it's your responsibility. That's the point of the legislation. It's now the burden of service providers to ensure that you are keeping children safe. It's not the parents' responsibility to hover and track their kids. It's not the child's responsibility. God forbid that anyone would take that stance. It is now legally service providers' responsibilities to ensure that children are protected from illegal content and content which is harmful to children, which is the illegal content, the primary priority content, the priority content, and the NDC as well. So what the games need to do to comply, and everyone will be very glad that I'm going to shut up in a minute and pass to my wonderful co-hosts, because I'm sure everyone is sick to death of my voice. I am. I had a cold a week ago. My voice was really husky and great. It was wonderful. And if this screen share closes one more time without me telling it to, I'm going to have words with my computer. What do games need to do to comply? Yep, we're going to have words. So yeah, we've touched on this broadly, but there's really, with those deadlines, but there's really a couple of basic things that you need to do. There are these assessments that have to be complete. The deadlines are overdue already. Ofcom has done this in a staggered approach to try to give everybody that's within scope enough time to be able to do all of the work. The problem is, and I imagine that pretty much everybody that's watching this and everyone that will watch this when we clip it for LinkedIn and YouTube and whatever down the road, most people haven't done any of the work because they didn't know that they were in scope, or they didn't realize the impact that it would have to them, or the level of work that needed to be done. The really important date is July 24th. That's the date that the enforcement of child safety duties comes into play. So you need to do these assessments, which the deadline's already done, but you need to do them as soon as possible. That's the children's access assessment, the risk assessment, the children's access assessment, children's risk assessment, and the illegal content assessment as well. It's important not just that you're doing this so you can implement the right features to protect children, but to protect yourselves from the regulator. You need to do this to have evidence that you've done the work. You need to have a pack available. So if a regulator comes and knocks at your door and says, what have you got in place? What have you done? You can go, here you go. We did the children's access assessment. We had highly effective age assurance in place. This is the volume of users that we have and their age bands. We identified these functionalities with a risk, and then we've put these measures in place. The real risk is if you don't do the work and you don't have this kind of like pack ready to go and you haven't ticked these boxes, it'll be viewed as negligence, and that's when you'll be pursued for fines. If you've done the work and there's been a mistake or something bad has happened, but you've done the work and you've done your best, I believe that Ofcom will take a proportionate and measured approach to help rectify the situation and assist you. If you're negligent and you haven't done the work, though, that's when, and we're already seeing investigations and fines being issued and prosecutions starting to happen for a number of big services. And it's usually because they've gone, pardon my French here, but Ofcom, we're not doing this. And that's the problem. So complete the assessments, meet the child safety duties by July 24th, because that's when they're really going to start caring about seeing your evidence, seeing the measures that you've put in place, and that you're actually taking a reasonable approach to protect children, and that you've got that evidenced. The third big thing is highly effective age assurance. Now, this is required for you to do the children's access assessment. This is required for you to be able to abide by your child safety duties. This is a really critical part of this, is being able to understand the actual age of your users. And Sam's going to do a whole deep dive into highly effective age assurance in just a minute. I know I said I'd shut up in a minute, and that's about 4 minutes ago, so I apologize. I lied a little bit, but I'm going to pause, and Sam's going to take over in a second. And implement all of the recommended codes of practice. This is the last portion that we're going to jump into today, where we're going to go through the 7 categories of codes, everything from moderation, which Modulate's going to speak to, highly effective age assurance, which we've got Entrust here to speak to, everything from settings and user functionality in terms of service. There's a whole list that needs to be done. But I've collated all of these, and I've produced this one list for you, which is the most applicable just for the games industry. And we'll go into all of that in detail. But the basics is do the assessments, meet the child safety duties deadline as of July 24th. Make sure you have highly effective age assurance in place so you can do the assessments and abide by your safety duties, and implement the recommended codes to protect users. And in the real world, it's really a case of just understanding the type of content that's regulated, understanding what the illegal content is, and understanding what the content that can be harmful for children are. Recognizing your game-specific risks, which for pretty much all games, we're quite fortunate here that we don't have content recommender systems, we don't have infinite scroll, we don't have all of these problems that social media have or search engines have, or so on and so forth. Our risk factor pretty much predominantly comes down to direct message, group message, VoIP. Which makes it quite easy for us that's the risk factor. And then implement practical and proportionate measures. We're going to cover this shortly, but basically you don't have to block people being able to play your game. You would just have to limit access to the high risk functionalities until they've gone through highly effective age assurance, at which point you can give access to these functionalities to varying degrees. So it might be that you don't give access to VoIP, or you don't give access to in-game messaging or direct messaging or whispering or group chat until someone's gone through the highly effective age assurance process, so they can still play your game as normal. They just don't have access to that bit. And then once they've ticked that box, if they're, for example, 13 years old, maybe they have access to text chat but not VoIP, and maybe the profanity filter is forced on, right? So you can protect them from that harmful content, from that risk factor that's proportionate to that age group. And then, yeah, the regulatory requirements, as I've covered, the highly effective age assurance, do the assessments, do the safety duties. I'm repeating myself a lot here now, but let's move on to the bit where I shut up. Codes of practice. As I mentioned, there's 7 here. There's governance and accountability for your service. This includes having a child protection officer. It includes having evidence for what you're doing, evidence for issues that have come up. It's very much about reporting. There's highly effective age assurance, content moderation, reports and complaints, settings, functionality and user support, terms of service, and then abiding by those safety duties. We'll start with highly effective age assurance. This is the last slide, and then I am quiet. So there's basically 2 types of code that games will fall into. I believe that 99.9% of games will be what's called a PCUB5. Okay, dead sexy name, I know, really easy to remember, rolls off the tongue. It basically means that you don't allow primary priority content or priority content. It's prohibited. You don't allow it. It's against terms of service. But it isn't technically feasible for you to take down that content instantly. So if there's like bullying, abuse, hate content, if people are being racist over VoIP towards each other, which would be inciting abuse and hatred, if it's people telling each other to go kill themselves, stuff like that, it's not that you're allowing it, you don't allow it, but it's not necessarily technically feasible for you to prevent that content being consumed by another user before the user consumes it, right? So I believe that's pretty much what every single game will be, is a PCB5. You guys don't endorse or condone or want primary priority content or priority content, but it's just not technically feasible to guarantee that every single user doesn't doesn't have this content put in front of them. Now, this is important because it'll go to play into some of the other codes that we're going to go into. But I am now going to be quiet, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Sam, who's going to talk more about age assurance and some of the things that you guys need to be conscious of. So, Sam, I'll shut up. Over to you, mate.
Thank you very much, mate. So from everything that Andrew has already shared, I think it's fair to say that compliance with the Online Safety Act is not only highly recommended, but mandatory for all gaming platforms. And to achieve compliance there, gaming companies must follow a stricter approach. And that starts with implementing the highly effective age assurance. Should I just be the one moving the slides, or are you doing it for me?
I'll click through for you, mate.
Okay, thanks. So what is it? What is it and what it means for gaming studios? So you can see, first of all, that age assurance is a cornerstone of online safety because it enables platforms to distinguish between adults and child users, and therefore whether users are old enough to access, as Andrew mentioned already in detail, certain types of content or services. And this distinction is essential for tailoring content, applying appropriate safety measures, and ensuring compliance with the Act's requirements. But regarding highly effective age assurance specifically, crucially, it demands exact age verification. So not merely differentiating between minors and adults. And that means that it demands age verification that don't just categorize users as minors or adults, but precisely verify their actual age. And that's what is meant when we refer to the method to be used as needing to be highly effective. It has to deliver a high level of confidence that the user is actually X years old and so falls into this or this category or this other user category. And this level of accuracy is crucial for gaming studios, obviously. But the Ofcom has indicated that to use an appropriate verification method or determination method, the highly effective age assurance must fulfill 4 critical criteria. Next slide, please. So it has to be technically accurate. So methods must be reliable and reliably accurate, both in control environment and real world scenarios. They also have to be reliable, by which we mean providing consistent and repeatable age verification results. So basically, you don't try twice and once you're identified as being 13 years old, or the next time 15 years old. Then it has to be robust. So it must be resistant to bypass by minors, attempts or circumvention with, for example, forged documents. It has to ensure that systems can handle various real-world conditions, whether it's poor lighting, whether it's device quality variations. And finally, it has to be fair, so it has to be equally effective across different diverse demographic groups and minimize bias. So that applies to all gaming studios, including smaller indie developers. And those standards should be carefully incorporated from the outset, because, as Andrew mentioned, doing so will further proof you and your offering, not only in the UK, but also in the EU, also in the US, also in Australia, because this is the direction of travel from a regulatory standpoint, and it will cover you against future disruptions, costly redesigns. So if we have a single message is, don't play with this, basically. Now, when we take a look at the different verification methods for verifying age assurance, which can satisfy the requirement, it won't surprise anyone that the Act explicitly excludes basic self-declaration method. In fact, when you're implementing this Act, you will have several methods to choose from, and each of them have pros and cons. Obviously, the most commonly known is probably photo ID matching, so where you verify government-issued ID and you do biometric verification, which is suitable, but it can introduce friction, and it's obviously robust data privacy management because there is biodata involved. When it comes to facial age estimation, it's obviously quick, it's user-friendly, it's low friction, but it has obviously lower accuracy, it's prone to demographic bias, it's insufficient alone to satisfy the requirements of the highly effective age assurance. And then there are other methods which cannot work by themselves. So whether it's open banking and credit card checks, because obviously then you may at best know if a user is a minor or major, but you're unable to determine exactly its age. And there is digital identity services, which are, in our mind, like pretty optimal when they rely on photo ID matching. That involves confirming a user's identity using official documents, biometric data with AI-powered checks, and being able to re-authenticate also users who have already gone through the flow. So this means you don't have to provide any disruption to users who have already verified, and users being verified for the first time will be able to reuse the verification they just did across other services in the future and in an interoperable manner. We do believe that this is the optimal approach, and because it's robust, it fulfills the four criteria mentioned before. It ensures regulatory compliance, and also it balances the best UX with privacy and security. And then probably next slide, please. Based on the results, you will be able to restrict younger users from accessing potentially harmful features like live chat, user-generated content that is inappropriate or that falls into the different categories of content that Andrew described in detail earlier. And that until they are verified as adults, so they move to another tier of age group, depending on their age group, and potentially preventing them entirely from accessing certain features or applying relevant filters. If you can move to the next slide, please. Now, unfortunately, that's not the only element to take into account, as currently the industry players face advanced challenges from deepfakes, which mean AI-generated falsified biometric data that can bypass traditional checks, synthetic IDs with artificial identities blending real and false information, which are very, very challenging to detect, and also injection attacks, which are fraudulent reuse of previously captured or falsified biometric data. And next slide, please. Here at Entrust, we leverage our AI-powered identity verification technology to offer comprehensive solutions that address all these threats, in addition to the risks we already mentioned, which are specifically related to the Online Safety Act. So we have advanced document authentication method, which enables us to perform detailed verification processes to confirm the authenticity and to detect document manipulation or forgeries. We have real-time biometric matching and liveness detection, which ensures real-time verification, confirming users are present, they are authentic, they are who they claim to be, and it mitigates the risk of deepfakes and injection attacks. And also, it automates the matching, which reduces the need for manual intervention, which in turn means faster turnaround times for demanding gamers. And we are also providing solutions that are suitable from a privacy, compliance, and data security point of view, because our solutions rely on privacy-preserving technologies, zero-knowledge proofs, and strictly adhere to GDPR and UK data protection regulations to protect users' data whilst ensuring precise age entries. So basically, with that solution, users are able to start their digital journey anywhere, anytime, through a simple and user-friendly online experience that meets regulatory requirements, that is reusable. And by partnering with PlaySafe ID and leveraging Entrust, robust and comprehensive solutions, gaming studios can certainly confidently meet the Online Safety Act requirements when it comes to highly effective age assurance, and also counter these advanced fraud challenges. And what I would like to finish on is that it's not only about legal compliance, it's also a strategic opportunity. It positions gaming studios strategically to build user trust, to strengthen brand reputation, and to ensure ongoing compliance, not only in the UK, but also international standards, international frameworks that are constantly evolving on top of, obviously, enhancing user safety, and particularly for children for different age groups. So that's the direction of travel with regards to highly effective age assurance, and I've talked a lot. So I will let
No, it was great. It was
other
really good.
panelists.
For sure. So one of the things that I just want to touch on just before we move forwards is, that four criteria is really, really important, right? Technical accuracy, reliability, robustness, and fairness. It's really important that you guys, when you're assessing what kind of method you want to roll out, you consider what is likely to tick, because those four criteria, by the way, that's not what Ofcom has said you need to do. That's actually written within the act, within the bill. Like, that is actually what the law says. It is not negotiable. It is not variable. It has to be technically accurate. It has to be reliable. It has to be robust, and it has to be fair. So it's really important that you guys choose a method that ticks that criteria, because that criteria isn't changing. That criteria isn't going away. And as time goes on, I think that criteria is even going to be more adhered to. I think you might get some leeway in the first couple of months, for example, as various companies explore different solutions and different methods for doing this. But over time, I think it's going to be even stricter to meet that criteria. So yeah, obviously shameless plug here, but as Sam was saying, PlaySafe ID, we're a reusable digital identity provider. We're powered by Entrust, their amazing kit. We went down, me and my CTO and some of our team, we went down to Entrust. We saw their fraud lab. We saw all of the ways that they, all of the vectors for attack that they're simulating and testing against. And it's incredible. Like on Reddit, on some of the stuff that we're doing on Reddit, sometimes players will turn around and be like, oh, can't you just deep fake this? And it's like, I've seen myself looking as Brad Pitt as well as Angelina Jolie, right? And I look great in a pair of heels, apparently. But honestly, the kit that they have is above and beyond anything that you can possibly imagine. And the level of security is brilliant. And ultimately, this boils down to protecting children. And yes, this adds a friction step. And yes, this can potentially add some disruption to users, which is why what we're trying to do at PlaySafe is mean that a user only has to verify with us once. And then every game that works with us, we can pass the age band that Ofcom have said. So you would call our API and you'd say, yo, how old is this user? And do they have a valid PlaySafe ID? And we would say, yes, they're 12 to 15, right, as an example. But it means one verification for the user and goodness throughout the industry. It also adheres to those four criteria to the highest standard. That's my only cautionary tale to everyone. And if you decide to go a route that isn't technically accurate, reliable, or robust or fair, I reserve the right to turn around and say, I told you so, in months and years to come. Cool. So on to the next slide. And that's kind of all for me for a moment. In terms of content moderation, these are the codes that you have to adhere to if you are a PCUB5. This was why this is relevant. PCUB5, you don't allow primary priority or priority content on your platform. These codes relate to if you're a PCUB5. There's a PCUC1. They've all got really catchy names. You'll be singing this all evening long. Having a content moderation function to review and assess suspected content that's harmful to children. You have to have this function in place. Non-negotiable. PCUC2, having a content moderation function that allows for swift action against content harmful to children. Non-negotiable. Have to have this in place. Have to document it, evidence it, have it working. PCUC3, setting internal content policies. Gotta have this. PCUC4, performance targets. How are you going to deal in terms of time, and what are the KPIs regarding you handling illegal content harms or content that's harmful to children? PCUC5, prioritization. How are you internally going to prioritize the most serious content and then get down to the less serious content, but make sure it's all adhered to? PCUC6, you have to make sure that you have a plan for resourcing, that you have the physical availability and the people in place, or the teams, or the resource, or the software, or the outsourced solution to make sure that you are ticking the resourcing box, that you can actually implement these measures. PCUC7, provision of training and materials for individuals working in content moderation as full-time staff. So if you have full-time staff, how are you going to train them? How are you going to upskill them? How are you going to make sure that they're performing? And then PCUC8, which is the same as C7, but it's for volunteers as opposed to full-time staff. So these are kind of like the 8 criteria to content moderation that have to be adhered to as part of the codes of recommended codes of practice. And on that note, I'm going to shut up now because we've got Mike, who is an absolute legend and a powerhouse, and Modulate are one of my favorite companies in the world, solving one of the hardest problems in the world, which is content moderation. So I'll pass it over, and Mike, feel free to chat about this for a bit, mate.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. I do not, in fact, have slides, so we're just going to be staring at our lovely faces for a little while, but I think that'll be a nice way to mix it up.
Love it.
So there's a couple of topics that I want to cover. Thank you, Andrew, for sort of setting the stage, and I'll be talking through a lot of those standards you just walked through, but I want to start taking a further step back and sort of talking about the intent and philosophy behind the OSA in large part, which is really part of a larger global transition we've been seeing over the last few years, where regulators are trying to move from what you would call the knowledge standard to something that looks more like a harm standard. And this is an explicit component of the OSA. We see this in a lot of other regulations that have been coming up too. So historically, there's been this sense that if you, the platform, don't know about something bad, you are not really liable for it. You don't really have any obligation around it. And not every platform has, but some platforms have taken that as license to stick their head in the sand such that they can't possibly find out as their sort of liability mitigation strategy. And this shift from the knowledge to harm standard is in large part an attempt to force platforms to think more deeply about the potential harms and say, hey, if something might be happening on your platform, you actually have a positive obligation to look for it. And that is a really big transformation, which, especially when it comes to content and content moderation, introduces some real technical challenges. If you are a massive scale game, we work with a number of AAA studios, you might have tens of millions of hours of voice chat content in any given month going through your platform. Simply collecting that data, much less trying to transcribe or analyze it, is a significant technical challenge. So the first thing that any platform that's sort of operating under this paradigm needs to be thinking about is, how are we going to actually understand what's going on inside of our game? And tying back to the risk assessments that Andrew talked about earlier, there's really two philosophies of how to approach this, and you need to pair them together. One is this sort of armchair philosopher approach. Just actually asking yourself, hey, we're introducing these features. What could go wrong? Not just asking that question, but documenting the procedure of asking yourself that question. How are you assessing that? Is it literally one guy in an armchair? Are you bringing in experts from academia? Are you bringing in actual players to test different things? How are you validating your theories about what could go wrong? And this is true not just for content moderation, but it's true for any kind of features that you're introducing into your platform. Even things like age assurance. We see in games frequently you have situations where there's account sharing. A kid jumps onto mom or dad's account that was already set up, logged in, and now they're getting exposed to something new. Do you have to have a technical solution to prevent that from ever happening? Absolutely not. But do you need to have contemplated those risks and have a strategy for how are you thinking about that? How are you going to respond if you become aware of that kind of situation? Yes, you do. Same as Andrew mentioned before, there's standard content types like text chat and voice chat that you definitely need to be proactive about. And then there's more new content types, especially in the world of AI. There's the broader world of user-generated content. Not just user-generated text messages, but can you actually modify the game world? Can you create new assets? What if those assets start to look a lot like a swastika? How are you going to be managing those things? How are you going to be proactively shaping the kinds of controls and features you make available in your game? Again, I do want to be clear, there is not an expectation that you will have perfectly solved these problems. The expectation is that you have taken the time to actually think through how these features could be misused and what scale of harm could be possible from that. And you have instituted proportionate measures to be monitoring for that kind of harm, assessing whether it is at the scale you expected or if it's greater and requires a new kind of intervention, and actually following through on that intervention. So that was one piece, is sort of philosophizing and theorizing. And then the other piece is actually going into your game and measuring what's happening. And again, in some cases, that's relatively straightforward to do. But in other cases, that becomes very complicated when you're dealing with media types like voice that are extremely difficult and expensive to process. I don't want to spend the meat of this conversation pitching Modulate. We can have other conversations and other times. We've got lots of great content there. But one of the core things that Modulate does is using a tiered AI system that is able to review all of that voice content without immediately applying the full force of analysis to every single piece of voice content, which would be inordinately expensive. So finding some kind of strategy that is nuanced enough to say which pieces of content require me to look more closely, that is not so coarse as to just say, I'm going to ignore 90% of my users or something like that, but actually strikes that right balance. That's a really important part of that initial strategy. Even before we get into actually taking moderation actions, just for you to be able to ultimately say, I have a sense of how bad the problem is in my ecosystem. Just to give a sense of why this is an important problem to solve, without naming names, we've had the opportunity to work with a number of AAA studios, and many of them, prior to implementing Modulate's moderation tools, had been relying fully on user reports to become aware of harmful behaviors, both illegal and the legal but still problematic under the OSA kinds of behaviors. What we have generally found is that those user reports are flagging somewhere between 1/6 and 1/10 of the offending users. Mm-hmm. And also only about 1 in 5 of those user reports is actionable. So what that means is, first, you need to sift through a mountain of reports, most of which are not actionable because they're missing key details or someone was just trying to bully someone using the reporting system or any number of other issues. And then after you've done all of that work, you end up still only catching, 10% of the actual harmful content. What we've basically found every time we've turned TalkSmod on is the studios just will sort of have their jaw drop of, oh, I knew that this kind of bad stuff happened. I didn't really understand the volume of content that was coming through until I had this window. Because it's very hard to conceptualize when you're a massive platform how much of this stuff might be happening, how many different instances could be occurring in each hour. But part of your obligation when you're going through this risk assessment and putting together a proportionate content moderation strategy is that word proportionate presumes that you have taken an initial measure. So you need to be able to justify why that initial measure is a legitimate understanding of what's going on, and basing your argument on, well, no one has reported this to us, so it's probably not a problem, or similar kinds of claims is not going to be legitimate because there's data far beyond just Modulate showing again and again that those user reports fail to cover everything that you're going to be looking for. So you do need some way to proactively take a look and understand what's going on within your ecosystem. That's step one. Now that we've sort of gone through, hey, what's happening in the ecosystem? Now we get into all of those standards that Andrew was just talking about in terms of what are your obligations to do something about that as you've kind of been uncovered it. And there's a lot of interesting challenges around this. As Andrew alluded to, content moderation is really a nuanced art more than a science in a lot of cases, because ultimately what you're moderating against is a combination of objective standards in the sense of this is illegal, so you don't have a choice of whether or not to permit it on your platform. But it's also subjective feeling on your own side about what kinds of behaviors are permissible within your game. So I'm going to actually start with PCUC 3, setting internal content policies. Most platforms don't do a very thorough job of this. They see this as purely a compliance measure. But the important thing to think about when you're setting both your external code of conduct and your internal guidance for your team is that what you're trying to basically state is what kind of experience do I want people to have when they come into this ecosystem. saying, hey, I want people to be allowed to get a little bit rowdy. That's fun sometimes. That's an acceptable thing to state. You do need to put some bounds around that. In the same way a sports bar might say, yeah, yelling at the TV when your favorite team just sort of misses a goal, that's totally fine. Throwing bottles at the bartender because you're upset that your team just lost is probably not fine. There is an intuitive understanding of where the lines are. But in these online spaces, especially in games, those intuitive understandings don't really exist because we don't tend to do a good job actually explaining to players what's expected of them. I have had folks complain to Modulate, hey, I just got punished by ToxMod, and all I was doing was shouting slurs at a 7-year-old until they burst into tears. But I'm playing an M-rated game. I should be allowed to do that. If that's the misunderstanding that you have, then we all have some collective work to do to reestablish what are the expected boundaries of this experience. On top of that, voice is different from text, and most games have gotten used to setting policies against text. Voice is not just the same thing, but allowed. There are fundamentally new kinds of harms that can happen in voice. So Modulate has a category we call audio assault, which is strictly non-verbal audio that basically denies the channel to everyone else. That could be a kid playing a fart sound over and over on their soundboard. It could be someone playing really loud music. It could even be your microphone being installed wrong and just having a ton of static that gets in the way. But because all voices get mixed together into a single channel, if you're playing a loud and intrusive enough sound, you have just denied all the other users access to that communication tool, because even if they try to speak, they will not be heard. That doesn't really exist in text chat. No matter how loud and obnoxious I am using all caps, you can send your own separate message and it will be well understood as a distinct thing in the world of text chat. So there's fundamentally new kinds of harms that you need to be sort of moderating against. And of course, there's also nuance in voice that may not exist in text. I've actually put together sort of primer surveys that I've shared with a number of different studios to just say, hey, debate amongst yourselves how you would respond to these 10 different clips. And the purpose of putting together these surveys is to just show how the way something is enunciated can drastically change the experience of someone hearing it. I'm not going to try and imitate the enunciation, but one of my favorite examples is someone just saying, hey, come to my private room. You can probably imagine how that, said in a particularly skeezy way, could sound very upsetting, whereas said in a much more bland way is not at all a fundamentally bad thing to be saying. So you need those content policies, not just to dictate this word is allowed or not allowed, which, by the way, don't generally do that anyways. You should be looking more at the context. But you also need to be thinking about how is it expressed? How is it received? What is the sub-community within your game that's hearing that? Is it okay for some communities to actually reclaim words that have been used as slurs against them, but that they're using within their community to empower themselves? Or are you sort of so dedicated to protecting users, especially younger users, from even the existence of those slurs that you're going to block that, even if it blocks authentic and positive experiences of a minority demographic that was trying to reclaim that word? These are, again, really nuanced topics. You need to have your own position on a lot of them. The OSA will not tell you, here is the definitive correct position on much more than the truly illegal stuff. But it does require you to have a clear position and to express it clearly and to have those standards, especially in the for games that are likely to have children coming in and playing. You need to be saying very clearly, is the standard that we've set for our game something that accommodates children under the standards of the OSA, under the definition of what this additional harmful content is? And you need to be managing your marketing and managing the way that you bring kids, if you do, onto your platform accordingly. Pausing for a moment if anyone wants to correct me, add any nuance before I continue ranting along here.
No, I think that was all dope. Just a couple of comments, and I'll give you a second to breathe before we crack on. But yeah, one of the points I found interesting that you mentioned is the how few text reports there are and the amount that's missed. Something that I've always found interesting when I've spoken to people in the industry is they don't necessarily think that toxicity is bad as it is, but as a consumer in chief and someone that's obsessively played unpleasant volumes of video games over the last 20 years. If I'm not playing game X and told to kill myself at least once a night, am I even playing? Like, it's like toxicity really is a really big thing that's really common, really, and it's a culture-based thing. I think because with the evolution from like voice chat and multiplayer gaming from like the COD 4 Modern Warfare days, you know, those lobbies were absolutely abhorrent. And even League of Legends playing like since the beta, you know, people saying, "Oh, I hope your whole family die of cancer" and stuff like that would happen at least 30 times a match. And then it's evolved now where Riot has, as you've identified, come up with really strict boundaries as to what's okay and what isn't okay. And now you can't say anything offensive kind of like in any capacity without getting chat banned to some degree. So they've really gone from being like the Wild West in their early days as they were figuring out this massive company that they exploded into now having these really solid barriers to protect players. And as a result, it's a much nicer place to be. It's much nicer to play League now or Valorant or whatever than it used to be back in the day.
And what's amazing is the number of folks I've encountered who don't have that intuition of, you know, well, maybe part of the charm of games is that there's that toxicity and everyone's kind of used to it and it's not really going to impact things. So one of the more exciting studies for us is Call of Duty sort of volunteered to do a very detailed study with us to understand the impacts of this kind of content moderation. And introducing improved voice moderation into Call of Duty drove an uplift to user retention by close to 30%.
What, you mean people being happier and having a nicer experience means that they will play and spend more? Madness.
I know, right? It shouldn't be shocking.
Who would have thought?
It's nice to at least have empirical evidence. Let's just say it like that. So, all right. We've talked content policies. We've talked the need to understand what's going on here. We can kind of rapidly hit a lot of the other content standards that you mentioned earlier, Andrew. So talking about having a content moderation function at all. Obviously, you know, I don't think anyone needs me to spell out the details of you need to be able to find the content. You need to have some kinds of standards around it. This almost certainly does mean you're using some kind of AI. That's just a requirement at the level of scale that games operate at. You're not going to be able to staff content moderators to review every single thing, especially given PCUC2, where you need to actually act swiftly when you encounter those things. So you can't just say, oh, we have users who will get to it in several days or something like that. So in order to do that, you need some kind of AI. My recommendation and Modulate's recommendation is to use AI as what we would call a triage system. So the purpose of the AI is to rule out these conversations are totally innocuous. These conversations are totally horrific, and let's take some immediate action. And then these are the conversations where there's actually a nuanced question that deserves to be engaged with by a human moderator. And what you can do is the vast majority of conversations fit into one of those first two buckets. And so you've massively reduced the scale, but you haven't taken any real risks from an accuracy standpoint. And you know, top-level AIs such as ToxMod actually meet or exceed the accuracy of human moderators in most cases. But even if you're much more concerned about that, being able to say, okay, when we do have that edge case, we're going to be able to bring that to a moderator to review. But the vast majority of this stuff, and in particular, the stuff that is most overtly harmful or most overtly illegal, that is going to be sort of most critical to Ofcom to see you taking action against. That's the kind of stuff that AI is actually really well tuned for. This can also help you with user reports, right? Being able to use that same kind of AI capability to rapidly sift through the user reports, throw away the 5 out of 6 that can't be used, and then let you focus on the one that actually is usable. Again, saves a huge amount of time, capacity, cost that ultimately allows you to be much more effective in reviewing that content. Probably the other thing that's worth talking about here is training of individuals. We already talked about setting internal policies, But the other thing to be aware of is that this content is in fact harmful to the moderators reviewing it, not just to the players who are originally exposed to it. This is especially true, unfortunately, when it comes to voice. Not only does voice sort of psychologically impact us more deeply because of the emotional connotations to it, but voice can actually cause physical damage. If you don't do a good job normalizing the audio that your moderators are listening to, you actually have a lot of studies showing people contracting tinnitus and other physical ailments that can cause them serious harm in the rest of their life because they were listening to such variable audio all of the time. So it's really important to be thinking about two additional questions here. One is, what do my moderators actually need to see to make a decision?
Yeah.
Don't default to say you have to experience this entire conversation. But again, a great place for AI and other tools to come in is quickly sifting through the conversation and saying, these are the hot spots. This is why we think it's worth sort of taking an action against this user, and enabling the moderator to review that much more quickly, but also with much less exposure to the direct harmful content. The other thing that you want to be thinking about is, again, how can we change the mode of that content? So in our case, we do, of course, allow moderators to listen to audio that has been sort of adjusted to decrease the risks there. But we've actually designed our voice moderation platform to try really hard to discourage you from actually clicking the play button unless it's truly necessary. And that means not only providing transcriptions, but also things like emotion annotations in the text form, so that you can get as good of an understanding as possible without actually clicking play. And that both allows you to move faster because it's easier to parse text than it is to listen to audio in terms of speed. But it also, again, reduces the amount of time that you need to listen to the really harmful stuff. Even reading a transcript with emotion annotations is fundamentally a lot less damaging. So that's part of the materials that you need to be providing to your moderators. And that is something that we're seeing increasing attention on from Ofcom and other regulators, is that part of the expectation when you are training your moderators, whether they're professionals or volunteers, is not just that you're telling them what your content policies are, but that you're actually devising a sustainable strategy such that you will be able to continue conducting this content moderation over time. And if that strategy is missing and you're just sort of assuming, well, they'll kind of deal with that, that's a conspicuous gap in your plan that's going to need to be filled.
Nah, that was dope. There's a lot of detail there and a lot of information there. And yeah, this is I'd say that this is one of the core functions of the Online Safety Act, right? Is the content moderation portion, because this is where the illegal content and harmful content comes in. And one big thing that Ofcom says is that it's the impact that content has, not necessarily the intent of the content. So that's a big portion to bear in mind as you guys are setting these internal content policies. And sometimes in games when people are banned and they're like, I didn't really say anything that bad, why am I banned? It's because it's the impact of what they're saying, not the intent of necessarily what they're saying to why they're necessarily getting that penalty.
And if I can piggyback on that before I finally shut up and let Anh-Vu have his turn.
All good.
Like what you just said is sort of the best pitch I could actually make for TalksMod's specific approach to voice moderation. One of the things that we've done that I think is really interesting is developed a system that, instead of starting by saying, what did you say and is it bad, can actually look at the conversational dynamics and the responses of other people and say, was someone harmed just now by whatever it is that you said? And if the answer is yes, then we can go backwards and say, what is it about what they said that was harmful? But that actually allows us to enable friendly banter in the way that you want in an online game, while still catching when those same words are having a much different effect. That's something that's actually quite unique to voice. You can't really do that in text. So whether you're working with us or building your own voice tool or looking at it from a different angle, I strongly encourage folks, both under the domain of the OSA, but also just as a best practice, think about how can you use responses of other players to understand how this is being received by your community, instead of just trying to set a standard that says these words or phrases are universally bad every time.
100%. No, that was dope. As you highlighted, we've got 17 minutes left before the webinar goes. Piss off, guys, and we've got some ground to cover. So we'll shut up and we'll pass it to the wonderful Anh-Vu. I love the work that you guys do. So take it away, mate.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And I promise I'll be quick. No slides either for me here. I guess the point of Anybrain being here is maybe to provide a bit of hope. If I'm a game developer and I'm listening to everything that we've been discussing for the past hour, I think it's very easy to be overwhelmed by the organizational but also technical challenge that the game developers are facing right now trying to solve these issues. But I guess it's good because hope is on the way. It's already out there actually with great techs like Entrust, like Modulate, and like us. I guess here the challenge is going to make sure that everything that is already in place is going to be very hard to bypass. Because we're talking here about a type of audience, players, personas that are incredibly smart and resourceful when it comes to bypassing everything that is already in place, especially when their aim is to harm other players. So it can take very different forms. But yeah, that's the main challenge I think that we're facing here. For instance, I think it's critical for us to be able to know who's who. What happens, as Mike mentioned, if we do account sharing? What happens if I validate my account, but then somebody else plays in my place, and let's say they are much more harmful than I am? What happens, as Samuel explained, if I use a deepfake to validate my KYC? All that kind of stuff, super complex, but we have to understand that these are techs and means that hackers and fraudulent players, harmful players in the gaming industry already have access to, and they are very well versed in how to use them. The good news is that it's our main focus at Anybrain Next. The only thing that we have been doing for the past few years, it's having the ability to catch those players as soon as they misbehave. So I guess before I can explain how we can actually concretely do it, maybe I should explain a bit more how the tech works, because it's, as I said in the intro, it's a fairly new way to identify fraudulent players in games. The state of the art, the first approach before Anybrain was to act as some sort of antivirus. They would see the use of a hack as you having a virus on a computer, and so you would have to identify it, retrofit retro engineering in order to solve it, and then deploy the fix. As you can understand, this is a very, very proactive approach. The idea behind Anybrain is to take the problem the other way around. If you're using a hack, it's going to have essentially an impact on the way you usually play the game. And so this is where our focus is. We are focused on understanding at pixel level how the players behave on a game, their physical ability to play the game, but also what is physically possible to do within that genre or within that game. And once we have done that, well, it's fairly simple, because the only thing that they need to do in order for us to be able to detect those behaviors is simply for them to play the game. So in terms of UX, essentially nothing to be doing except what you're here to do, play the game. One thing that is very important is that, as I was saying earlier, they are very resourceful in hiding themselves. They can hide their machines, their IPs, they can switch accounts, they can do a lot of different things. But one thing that they will never be able to fake is the way they play the game. And again, that's why they're here. So essentially, at some point, they will have to play the game, and this is how we're going to catch that it's them or not. Essentially, what we're providing here is some sort of identity card, but is very specific to your gameplay. How can we apply this to everything that was discussed? Well, first, Anybrain does what we call continuous authentication. So essentially, you play the game, and we get to know if it's you or not. Keep on playing the game. Let's say I switch account with Samuel, and Anybrain will flag in real time that it's not Samuel anymore playing the game, and so this should trigger other types of actions on the game developer side because of that. The other thing that we can do is also to detect age with the same sort of data set. So for now, it's in R&D for us. That's why I'm talking about stuff that's already out there and stuff that is coming very, very soon. We now have an era of about 4 years, but we believe that with the right partnerships, we will be able to actually estimate the age of a player within 1 year era. And especially for kids under 18, it's going to be very powerful, because it's going to finally give a way to the game developers to understand, okay, who is interacting with who in my game, and what kind of harmful content they can potentially be facing. Obviously, Anybrain's initial mission is to catch like cheaters using identity fraud. I think Mike mentioned for account sharing, we call that smurfing or boosting. We catch people using aimbots in FPS games. We catch people farming bots, bot farming in MMOs. These are all obviously very serious, but we believe now facing everything that we have just discussed, grooming, child abuse, it's becoming more and more critical to use a tech like that to identify the players who are also potentially harmful for others, especially kids. So yeah, that's my part. Sorry, very quick, but just I guess to give a bit of hope for what's coming up, and yeah, maybe the challenge is not that big.
No, I absolutely love it. The two of the big parts that I love the most, though, is first of all, as cheats have got more sophisticated and as cheat developers have got more sophisticated and this cat and mouse game has iterated, you now have like DMA, direct memory access. So you'll have a different tower running the cheat connected by what's viewed as just a cable or an adapter, but you're actually injecting from one computer to the other. Very hard to detect. Maps, for example, or radars. So it's not actually. There's so many ways that people can do very hard to detect things. And I think it's great that you're not just looking at the injection side of things and you're not just looking at logic-based or memory changes, that you're actually being able to view that behavioral aspect and see, is someone behaving, are they always pathing straight to enemies when they shouldn't know where they are? What's their headshot accuracy today? Why is it 99.9% from a million bullets? That either they're shroud and they're cracked today or so, something weird's going on. The other thing that I love, and one of the reasons that it's so cool to have all of these different tools and these different solutions, is the kind of reinforcement of approximate age. I think that's really important. I think that's such a strong supporting part alongside the highly effective age assurance, to know that a child is 8 years old, and then you guys are approximating, yes, they are about 8 years old, and then for you to be able to determine, actually, yes, it's still that child that's playing, it's not somebody else. It just goes to build this really good picture and really empower game devs. And really quickly, I just want to touch on this. I don't know about you guys, it'd be great if you could attest to it, but for indies and small studios and mid-sized studios, we're free on the PlaySafe ID sides of things for the KYC check and handling the highly effective age assurance portion, as well as keeping cheaters out. Is that true for you guys as well? Do you have preferential pricing or low pricing or free pricing for indies and stuff? Yeah. So just to add to your spirit of hope to everyone that's watching this, this doesn't have to be a massive cost burden for you. Like, there are these tools, these sophisticated tools with these brilliant teams, with these great solutions to help you overcome these problems. And we really want to help support you guys with this. We want to make sure that you're compliant. We want to make sure that children are safe. We want to make sure, and I think this is a fair universal statement, that games are as fair, fun, and safe for everybody as possible. I think that's kind of a mission that we're all on here. Cool. We have 7 minutes left before I'm going to get shouted at by the webinar, and we're all going to vanish into the ether. So I'm going to speed through these points like crazy. However, I'm going to provide a link. You can all go to docs.playsafeid.com, and we have all of this detailed within the Online Safety Act guide as well. So you can read through it in detail. And again, it's links to all of the relevant documents, both from Ofcom and the Act itself. But other things that you have to be conscious of: governance and accountability. You have to have an individual within your company that's accountable for the safety duties for children, so a child safety officer. This is like a data protection officer. If you need to have a DPO in place, this is adding that in. It's actually having someone responsible for the safety of children now. Written statements of responsibilities. So again, this is about that accountability. It's about having that pack of, you've gone through, you've done your due diligence, you've thought about this, and you've actually put these measures in place. And this is how you feel about these problems, how you think about these problems, and how you're solving them. Tracking evidence of new and increasing harm to children. Again, the Online Safety Act is not a one snapshot, right? It's not a just solve this today, done, tick box, whatever. You need to review kind of what's going on. Are you getting more toxic players? Are you getting new types of content harms? And then evidencing those. Again, Ofcom isn't going to hit you with a £18 million fine because you had an incident. They're going to hit you with an £18 million fine if you have several incidents and you've not done any of the work that they've asked you to do. You haven't put any of the measures in place. You haven't cared about this. You have to be making the physical effort to try to improve and keep children safe. So tracking new evidence is going to be a crucial part of that. Code of conduct regarding protection of children from harmful content. This is very similar to the moderation side here in terms of setting internal content policies. How are you going to protect children? Kind of what's your code of conduct? What's your ethics and thesis towards doing that? Reporting and complaints. This is a big section. I'll skip through this quite quickly. Enabling complaints. People have to be able to make complaints. Having easy to find, easy to access, and easy to use complaint systems and processes. This can include not needing to have an account to be able to make a report, stuff like that. Like, is it easy for people to find and be able to make reports to you guys about harmful content or illegal content? Provision of information prior to the submission of a complaint, appropriate action, sending it time frame. So being able to state to people, hey, we try to do this within a week or 5 days or 2 weeks, or, setting a realistic expectation. Appropriate action, sending further information about how the complaint will be handled. We're going to review it. Our systems will go through it. You'll hear from us in X number of days, etc. And then this is what the likely actions can be. Opt out from communications following a complaint. If I want to submit a complaint and I never want to hear from the company again, they absolutely have to be able to do that. That's a requirement. Appropriate action for relevant complaints about content considered harmful to children, and appropriate action for content appeals determination. So again, tons of information on the guide that we have, linking to the relevant statements and documentation from Ofcom to help you navigate these. But I only have 5 minutes left before this ends, so I'm going to go through it quite quickly. Apologies. Cool. Then there's settings and functionality and user support. This is nice and quick and easy. Age-appropriate user support materials for children. So you need to be able to speak in human, not baby language, but understandable language for a child, right? You need to explain in human language what the process is, what they can do, how they can use your platform, etc. And signposting children to support when they report harmful content. So if they report something harmful, you have to point them to this support material, which needs to be written in language that they can understand. User controls. If you have more than 700,000 monthly active users within the UK, you have to have functionality that allows the blocking and muting of users. If you don't have that number, you don't have to have that functionality in place. But you do have to have invitations to group chats, as opposed to just instant join and then able to see all of the content. This is particularly important for protecting children from bullying content on other types of platform like social media and like WhatsApp and Instagram and stuff like that. So they can't just join and see loads of abusive content. But it's still relevant towards the gaming side. If there's group chat, they have to have an invitation first. And then terms of service. You've got to update your terms of service to be clear about all of this stuff. And it has to be clear. It has to be accessible. It has to be easy to understand. So yeah, future-proof yourselves, choose good providers, work with highly effective age assurance. You have to have it for the assessments. You have to have it for the risk assessments. You have to have it to be able to abide by the children's safety duties as of July 24th. Do this properly. Take this seriously. The ultimate objective here is to keep children safe, and it's the law. So you have to be doing it. So do it in the right way. So overall summary, lots of stuff that we've obviously covered. But we've only got 3 minutes left, and I've seen that we've had a couple of questions here, so I'm going to try and dive into some of these. So Oscar asked, firstly, who should be responsible for capturing / storing this personally identifiable information or data? The game developer, publisher, or retail platform? For clarity, I understand that we are talking direct to consumer. That means the team are the retailer. So I would say if you wanted to use highly effective age assurance directly, so for example, working with a KYC provider, age estimation, or other kind of solution, the game would be the data controller, and then the supplier would be the data processor. So the person that's responsible for capturing and storing it would be the supplier, but you're legally responsible as the game as to the data that that's being held, whether it's on your network or not. So, for example, with how we work with Entrust, PlaySafe ID, we take all of the liability in terms of being the data controller. Entrust is our data processor. So even though none of the personally identifiable information from the verifications or the biometrics and documents, none of that's stored on our service system or network, it's all on Entrust side. but we're legally responsible for it. So by working with PlaySafe, for example, it's a case that you get to do all of this verification without having any of this additional PII on your systems or service. You won't have to update stuff with your DPO, etc. We're kind of taking the data liability away from games and studios while ensuring the compliance with highly effective age assurance behind all of the security of a massive company like Entrust and all of the cool stuff that they have. If it's the developer or publisher, are we not making everyone more vulnerable to phishing? Even when we have a portable digital identity. So that's one of the cool things that we've taken into account on our side of things, and why I think having a reusable digital identity like something like PlaySafe ID helps protect players. Because it's a case that we only accept one verification of a user, and then that's their PlaySafe ID. They can't get another one. No one else can kind of like claim theirs. And then if we see any suspicious activity against that account, we lock the PlaySafe ID until they've gone through a selfie reauth process to re-verify themselves. So that's kind of like on the account protection side of things. Again, Anybrain do an amazing job in terms of kind of like behavioral analytical profiling of users to be able to ensure that it's still the same person that's accessing. So if an account's cracked or stolen or phished or whatever, they can surface that to the developer and lock the person out of the account until a re-authentication as well. So there's that. Yes, this is obviously important information, and it's important to protect users with this information. But I think that's why all of us as providers have built this into our DNA and ways to protect users, protect accounts, etc. And won't this create a disproportionate impact on smaller developers, especially when adding on the other burdens from GDPR, AADC, and DMA? In theory, if they wanted to implement it themselves, I think that's true. Because if they're the data controller for it, they then have to balance up data privacy and being able to link other information that they have on their system to the user under GDPR and e-privacy directive, etc. But if they're working with an external third party, like on the PlaySafe side of things, we just return a random and anonymized set of numbers and letters, which doesn't relate to any of the PII. And then a course age band as per Ofcom's recommended age bands. So there's no impact on the data side of things. And as I mentioned, we're free, Anybrain's free, Modulate's free. We all have for small and indie developers. So we're really in this place where we can protect the user as well as protect the developer as well as being compliant. There are some other questions, but I don't know when this is going to cut off for us, and we're all over the 1 hour 30 mark. So I just want to take this opportunity before we carry on answering any questions to say thank you everyone so much for joining us today. And yeah, on the PlaySafe ID website, there's our documentation. There's a full guide on the Online Safety Act. And I want to say a massive thank you to Sam, Mike, and Anh-Vu for all of your insight and the great work that you guys are doing at your respective companies. Like, you're all tackling such monumentally shit hard problems. Like, more power to you guys. Thank you.
Same to you, Andrew. Thanks so much for organizing this and getting all of us together. I hope this was useful to the viewers.
Likewise. Thanks. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
No, my pleasure. So with that in mind, I'm going to try tackling a couple more questions, but I do apologize for when this thing just cuts out and kills the stream. I'll write a LinkedIn post with some of the questions after this as well, with some written answers. So if we do get cut off, ever gets spoken to here. There's another comment here. And Mike, this goes to what you said. Love the comment about the need to protect the community mod team. It's also important to protect them from legal liability, and especially user-supplied offensive materials, where I think it's still the legal position that possession is the offense. Is HEAA a solution to this now, back in the day when we had specific arrangement or processes with the Metropolitan Police?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I don't know all the details in the UK specifically, so I'll speak a little bit on the US, which is where we're based. But in the US, if you encounter, say, CSAM material, your obligation is to report that to an organization called NCMEC. They have really easy sort of reporting tools. Some platforms on the moderation side also give you capabilities to automatically submit that kind of report. That's something that Modulate works with studios on. Though you do need to manually confirm, yes, this is in fact CSAM before you end up sending that report over. If and when you do that, you've basically fulfilled your legal obligations. There is also a note that you should not be continuing to store that content on your side. So once you identify that, you need to clean up that content. But the fact that your moderator had once seen it doesn't create any liability for them, as long as they do, in fact, sort of clean up the data after submitting the report and did complete the report in a timely way.
No, that's great. I think it would be a little bit of a handcuff binding situation where tough, like you're the moderator, but we're going to put you in prison for moderating. Like,
yeah, I mean,
but it's a valid point, really valid point.
The greater danger, I think, is moderators downloading content that either contains this kind of illegal stuff or it simply contains PII of users or something like that. So you should have some basic oversight and tools that make it, hard to just download content directly from the moderation tool, especially if you're using volunteers. But that's more to protect against, if not malicious, at the very least, sort of willfully ignorant or willfully misbehaving moderators. Someone who's following pretty straightforward policies shouldn't be at material risk here.
Perfect. So with that said, the platform's just told me that we have 60 seconds to bugger off. So there's one more question, but I'll put it on a LinkedIn post and reply to it there. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming and joining us. Thank you guys so much for coming and co-presenting this with me and sharing your expertise. It's been really, really cool to have you and to have your unique insights. And yeah, July 24th is the deadline to comply with the child safety duties portion of the Online Safety Act. There's a lot of work to do with the access assessments, risk assessments, and measures that you guys need to put in place. I would just say get to work on it. Start documenting this stuff. Start getting ready to both protect yourselves, but also, more importantly, legitimately protecting children and adhering to this regulation and this compliance framework. So good luck. If you need any help, obviously feel free to reach out to either myself, Anh-Vu, Sam, or Mike on LinkedIn. And we'd be more than happy to have any conversations about how we can help you guys. But 10 seconds left, perfect timing. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.